be an interesting video today because we're taking a dive into the wacky world of macerating upflush toilets, starting off with the LibertyPumps Ascent II toilet. Introduced around circa 2012 and still made to this very day, this is probably one of the more well-known macerating upflush toilets. So this is a very interesting and very strange toilet. As you can tell, this toilet is a washdown. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give a spoiler for most of these washdown reviews. I absolutely hate washdown toilets. What started as a fear of these toilets became utter hatred. There's just a lot of problems with these washdown toilets, especially newer ones, regardless if they're in the US or outside, like in European or Asian countries. Starting off with the flushes of these, they're pretty much all the same. It just fills up the water with the ball and then just doesn't do anything else. It just lowers the water level. Another big problem we're having with most of these toilets is the pulling factors are generally terrible. Not all of them, but most of them do not pull things down pretty well and are pretty well known for leaving stuff behind. And also sometimes bowl rinse. But anyways, let's take a look at this toilet and see what it has to offer, and see if it's worth buying to this day. The design looks pretty plain until you get to the back portion. You can definitely tell this is a back outlet toilet. It pretty much connects to a machine that basically slices and dices up waste and sends it up for a pipe to the main sewer line. It's an interesting concept, and a lot of companies make macerating upflush toilets. But this is probably one of the more well-known ones. Design-wise though, it's very simplistic. The trapway opening is painfully generic. If you've seen a washdown toilet, you've probably seen a design similar to this. The tank parts are very simplistic, but generally speaking, they're kind of cheap. Usually this would have a cheap fill valve, but this one obviously has been replaced with a fluid master. Granted, it's a red top, so it's probably not much better. Everything else is pretty generic. Not the best tank parts, honestly, even though they're very simplistic and can be interchanged. Let's have a look at a flush. Let's first do a press and release. Way too short. Let's hold the handle down now. Not much better. So this is technically supposed to be a 1.28 gallon toilet, although that is probably the worst idea for a washdown I've ever seen, because the flushes seem to be very short. If you do extend a flush, it really isn't much better, as you might have saw. So I'm obviously going to have to do split scores as much as I don't want to. It's only fair. The pulling factor is outright terrible on a press or release. The flush is way too short and it barely does anything. I generally blame the flapper for this, but still, that's not a good sign. Holding down the handle does not really seem to improve much, as it's still pretty bad. Again, I don't like washdowns because of the fact that they leave stuff behind all the time. And even extending the flush doesn't always seem to help out, which is not good. Performance-wise, it seems to be okay. Now, on a press or release, it's probably not going to be very good considering the flush is way too short, but on an extended flush, it seems to be okay. It's a pretty generic washdown toilet, so it's not much to be expected. It's not going to give you the worst performance, but it's not going to be top tier either. The trapway is actually a little bit larger than you might think, even though looking at it from this angle, it looks kind of small. But still, it could definitely be a little bit better, but still, not the worst. Now let's have a look at bowl rinse. Look at all those gaps. The bowl rinse is absolute crap. There seems to be a lot of gaps everywhere, and the application of the rim jets is not very good. I obviously see a lot of stains towards the background, especially towards the mouth of the opening. The bowl rinse is just absolute crap. And that's the LibertyPumps Ascent II toilet. It's not very good, is it? But then again, this is a washdown, and considering my bias of washdowns, that's not very surprising. I don't know how other macerating upflush toilets will compare to this toilet, but it probably won't be much better than this. It's still not a very good toilet, even though the ideal is interesting. But let's put this toilet into the grading scale. Let's grade it. Taking a look at the overall design of the LibertyPumps Ascent II, I don't like it. To me, it just looks like a cheap and generic toilet, and I just don't care for it. And then you realize that this is also a back outlet toilet and it's connected via a pipe, which I think just looks tacky. I get that this is common outside the US, but I just don't like the look of this. It just looks weird, and not in a good way. so that means the value is a 4. While the tank parts are very simplistic, they are very cheap and very low quality. They are quite crappy. Obviously, the biggest problem I have is the flapper. It does not stay open very long at all. On a present release, this toilet basically flushes like a half-flush toilet in an international country, meaning that it quite literally just sprinkles water into the bowl. It's quite literally the most useless feature I've ever seen. I don't understand why everyone does it outside of the US. If you thought the dual flush system was bad in the US, take a step outside and it's so much worse. Outside of that, while the parts are very simplistic, they are just very low quality. You can replace them, but you would expect them to work fairly well, but they don't. That's why it's getting a 3. The quality control really isn't the greatest. The biggest problem is the ramjet quality. It's just very low quality, as expected, and the application is definitely the weakest part. We'll talk about that later, but outside of that, I don't notice anything else wrong with it, outside the fact that this thing shreds, but that's kind of typical of washdowns I've noticed. I'm giving it a 5. For a washdown, the trapway is pretty average. At least it doesn't look small, but it also doesn't look anything super exciting either. It's pretty middle of the road if you ask me. I give it a 5. Now let's talk about the flush. As I mentioned, I have a bias of not liking washdown flushes. It's just the most mundane thing I've ever seen. On a presser release, it is outright horrendous. It's basically a half flush on a washdown toilet. It is so useless. Now in this particular example, it's a little bit more longer, but no joke, a presser release is quite literally just sprinkling a little bit of water into the bowl. It's just so stupid and pointless. I'm giving it a 1 on the lower end scale. On the higher end scale, I'm going to be honest, it really isn't much better. While it does have a little bit more length, it just feels very short, and outside of that, the flush is very mundane. It's getting a 3. As expected on the presser release, the bowl clearance is horrible. You'll be lucky if you can remove solids, but it'll definitely leave floaters behind or your money back. It's easily a 2. On an extended flush, it is unsurprisingly still bad, with floaters being the main problem. I think the slight, and I mean slight and very minimal, might help clear out the bowl, but that isn't really saying much. It just still feels very short. That's why it's getting a 4. As for performance, it might be a little bit weaker on a presser release considering that it barely does anything. That's why I'm giving it a 4. On an extended flush, it's just okay. It's a pretty average trapway if you ask me, but I've definitely seen a lot worse from washdowns. While it's not the best, it's definitely the better aspect of this toilet. It's getting a 6. As expected, the ball rinse is pretty horrible. On a press and release, that is. It's getting a 2 considering it barely does anything. But unsurprisingly, it's not much better when you hold the handle down. The application and coverage is just very poor. And not to mention the area that gets the stains most is inside the trapway opening, on the back wall. It's actually a very common problem and it's not exclusive to this toilet, but I just thought I'd mention it anyway. It's getting a 3. Survivability is definitely not going to be very strong on a press and release. It's easily a 3 considering it barely does much of anything. On an extended flush though, it's pretty middle of the road. It really depends on some aspects of this toilet as well as the system it's attached to. It's a 5 at most. Now let's talk about the overall value of this toilet and see if it's worth getting today. On the lower end score, don't waste your time. It's barely going to do anything and you're not going to have a very good time with this toilet. Easily a 2. But now let's talk about it on the higher end scale. And there's a lot to talk about. In general, macerating upflush toilets are very proprietary. I understand why that is, but technically speaking, it's still proprietary, as it needs an entire system to cut some stuff up and send it up a pipe. Whether you get the LibertyPumps Ascent II or another macerating upflush toilet, do understand that these things are very expensive. Just for this toilet, for example, the prices range from around $1,200 to $1,400, which is very expensive. And you'll more likely be installing this in a basement. While they do recommend you install this elsewhere, if you need to do that, why not just install a regular toilet at that point? This is more of a basement toilet than anything. And to be honest, I just don't think it's worth your time. Outside of it being very expensive, there's some other factors to this toilet too. Like for example, the system that it's hooked up to. It's a system that you need to maintain and keep up with, which some people may not like. And not to mention, the toilet itself is just very crappy. It's just a low effort washdown that doesn't have a lot going for it at all. So not only do you have to maintain a system, the toilet itself is just very crappy. I just don't think it's worth the time and effort, honestly. And to be honest, a lot of macerating upflush toilets are going to be like that too. So I don't really recommend this system or this toilet. Big shock. That's why the overall value is a 3. Now for the final scores of the LibertyPumps Ascent II toilet. On the lower end scale it's a 31 out of 100, while on the higher end scale it's a 41 out of 100. Yep, this is the first step into macerating upflush toilets, and I'm going to tell you right now most of them are not worth it. This toilet being a perfect example.